And with that, I welcome you to online teaching, building engagement and interaction. And thank you to Andrea Echelberger for wrangling this panel.
Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for being here. I have to say, my favorite way to present is to be a facilitator for a panel because that means I get to just introduce amazing people with fantastic ideas and information to share, and then sit back and learn from them in the same way that you are all learning from them. So, we are going to hear from 4 different people today about building engagement and interaction in online instruction. And something I think that we can all agree with is that the more online educators there are, the better off the whole world is. Um, the online education is the way of the future. However, we're at the start of the way of the future, which means we are still in the process of figuring things out. And there are new tools added all the time that we want to make sure that we're familiar with and new techniques. And the best way to learn is to learn from people who are doing it hands on and have had that experience. So we are going to hear from 4 different panelists who are doing online instruction today. They're going to be covering strategies for engagement, looking at specific activities for interaction, and sharing some successful routines. And as well at the end, we'll share some quick recommendations for people. And just a reminder that all of the slides will be uploaded into the participant folder. And so that any links or ideas you can see on the slides will also be available for you to go back and look at them afterwards. So it is my pleasure to be able to introduce you to Stacy Abraham, MaryBeth Habel, Klas, and Tammy Twiggs. These are going to be our 4 panelists today. Each of them will have 15 minutes in which they'll be sharing. At the end of each panelist, there should be a couple minutes for questions, and then we'll have time for questions at the end. Of course, feel free to be sharing, popping questions into the chat. If it's something that we can get to during that panelist time, we will do that then. But again, we'll also have time for people to ask panelists questions at the end. And with that, I am going to hand it over to Tammy. So Tammy, thank you so much and take it away.
Good afternoon, everyone. So glad to be here with you. It's my wonderful privilege to get to be a part of this panel and get to engage with some of the ideas and activities I have learned over the past 3 years of doing online teaching. My name is Tammy Twiggs, and I teach at the Hub Center in St. Paul. And I teach GED Language Arts and GED Social Studies, as well as a course that is new this year for advising and testing in person. But otherwise, I'm 100% online teaching using Google Meet. And then I'm also going to talk about some of the tools that we all use. They're not new. And how I use them is really what I want to focus on. So Google Classroom is the learning management system that we have chosen to use here at Hubs that both Kris and I use. And then just interactive tools, Jamboard, which sounds like it's going away. I hope it doesn't. And then Google Documents. So just showing different ways that I use that in an online virtual setting to increase motivation, engagement, and interaction with my learners. And next slide, please. So 2 things as I was thinking about this, getting people to stay present on their device and remain engaged throughout the entire class is really a challenge. And I know those of you who teach online understand what I'm saying. So I have a really simple idea that's not rocket science, but I want to share it with you because it works beautifully because it's about setting expectations. And I have another idea that I just started using, super helpful to me and my learners, and it also increases interaction during the virtual lesson. So again, what I'd like to talk about is when we're doing different activities, whether it's a read aloud, whether we're reading text on the screen and people are responding in the chat, I always set the tone and let learners know that everyone is going to participate and that they can do so voluntarily, but I do keep a running list of who has read out loud, who's raised their digital hand, who has written in the chat. And then I tell learners, I'm going to expect you to participate in the way that you feel most comfortable, given the understanding that some people have young children at home and might need to stay muted, so they might interact in the chat. Some people might raise their digital hand, but we want to make sure others are getting included. So I always set the tone and say to participate and be interactive and engaged, and for your attendance purposes towards your goal of a GED, I'm going to keep a running list of how often you participate. And then sometimes I will say I'm going to call on you if I don't hear from you, because I want to include everybody and create that inclusive environment that we know is so important in that virtual classroom to get everybody engaged. The second strategy I have is something that I call teach the class. And so what I like to do with GED learners to get them engaged is to start that conversation. I'll have a list of guiding questions for a mentor text. And then I'll start out with an initial question. So I provide the question, and then I'll call on a learner to respond. And then I will feed the learner another question in the chat and ask that learner to take over as the teacher. And so at first, when I did this, it was a little bit bumpy, a little bit shaky, but because at that GED level, even if they are English language learners, they have that verbal ability to do so, even if they feel hesitant to do so. They start to ask questions, and they turn around and ask the class a question. And then they're allowed to then call on the person who raises their digital hand. And then they can respond with a correct, not quite, but, or we're almost there. And then I can prompt them with an additional question, and they can then choose the next person to lead the class next. And I will always jump in and be supportive, but it's a way to scaffold that learning, because as we know, when we're doing most of the talking, our learners are passively listening. But when the students become the teacher, that is when they truly internalize that learning. And so that has worked beautifully in my class. Again, as I said, people have a higher verbal ability. They can speak. Sometimes they're hesitant to do so, so it's on a voluntary basis. But once one person does, it sort of catches on. So that's really helped me to turn the learning over to my students. And as they do it more frequently, they get better and better at it, and they seem to enjoy it and be much more engaged in the class. So those are two ideas, and I don't want to take up too much more time. So I'm going to go to the next slide, because you're going to get a lot of wonderful ideas from all of the other panelists as well. So I just want to show you another slide. So if we can go to that next slide, Andrea, please.
Absolutely, Tammy. And as we're doing this, there was a question in the chat
Okay.
wondering if you require students to keep their cameras on.
Very good question. So one of the things that's a challenge, as many of you know, I teach 100% online. And so I'm at home using my Wi-Fi at home. And sometimes that means that the bandwidth is not great, as you well know. And then our learners also have that to contend with at home. So I do, during my lessons, have them turn their camera off during the time that we are all engaged, just as you all are engaged right now. When they do go into breakout rooms, like you're going to see right here, then I tell them, I'm going to need you to turn your camera on and unmute. So what you're seeing on the screen is something I just did in January. It is not something I created, but something I used and I borrowed. It's called a Civil Rights Movement Gallery Walk, and we're just going to click on it very, very quickly. So people will be assigned to a breakout group, and there will be a total of 5. And each group will get an image. So this is reading an image, and what do you see in the picture? And if we go to the next this is the question everybody's going to get. So group 1, group 2, group 3, group 4, group 5, you're going to investigate the picture and just answer the question in your group, what is happening in this picture? This one happens to be text heavy, so I might put learners in this group who have a little bit higher reading level. Others, you can read without having a high reading level. So we just look at maybe one more example, Andrea. We don't have to look at all of them. And they're very powerful images. They are primary source documents. They're also very graphic. And I tell learners, as we study civil rights in the month of January, this is sort of an opener into the month so that we can begin to talk about what that is And using a picture allows engagement regardless of the level of the learner, whether they can read very, very high and well, or whether their reading level might be a little bit lower, they can still engage with what they're seeing in that picture. Then they're going to come back and they're going to report back as a group. So group 1, what did you see? What did you notice? What do you understand? And so forth, group 2, group 3. And so all the groups are sharing out loud. So that's one way that we can interact and increase engagement. And then the second one is just a Google document. So if we can go back to the presentation and go to the next slide, please. And what we're doing in this one, if we can click into it just for a moment, totally different topics. So this week we did advantages and disadvantages of social media. So I just want to show just a few. If we can go into the document, Andrea, and just scroll down just through the first page or 2 or 3. You can see right here, I'm utilizing different tools. So raise your digital hand. What's your primary app that you're using right now? And even if it's not on the screen, and then I'm going to write it down and check in with everybody. And people are very excited to talk about the apps they use. And then we'll go to the chat on the next activity and talk about what would the world be like without social media, and how might your decision making change, and would that be better for you or worse for you? And I have them just pick one writing prompt, and then I voluntarily call on people to respond, and people are super eager to jump in. And then this leads to a pros and cons, which we're not going to open right now, but it's an advantages and disadvantages where people are going to group up and talk about all the benefits of social media and all of the things they're seeing that could possibly be harmful. So again, everybody is going to be in the document. I'm going to use it as a view only when I'm first training people, because I don't want things moved about. And then I also want to be able to give people a chance to interact with the lesson. So I do use breakout groups for both of these. Sometimes I'll do one per lesson. I have a 2-hour class. All my classes are 2 hours. Sometimes it will be 2 breakouts, and they're pretty short. So it's a turn and talk, discuss your ideas, and bring them back to the main group. Sometimes we're raising our hand to respond. Sometimes we're typing our ideas in the chat. So those are just 2 different types of interactive ways that I ask my learners to engage with content and try to make it as inclusive as possible so everybody's engaging with it. So if we can go to the next slide, please. So the second thing I want to cover is some of the routines that I use. And once I train my learners in this, they know exactly what to do. So when I create my Google Meet, I put the agenda. You can see the agenda here where it says, here's this week's agenda. So when they come to class, not only do they know what the essential questions are going to be, as you can see on number 2, but I'm also going to list the language goal as well as the content targets and what they're going to focus on and how that connects to the GED. So that's one key thing is every week you're going to get a new agenda. Might be the same Google Meet link, but the agenda is going to change every single week. When I direct learners to that, those who miss class are going to say, what did I miss? And I'm going to direct them to the agenda. And then the second thing I do, if we can go to the next slide, to give everybody access to all of the materials before class, during class, and after class, is I set up my Google Classroom in such a way that the weekly assignment is always at the top. So when they come to class, they can open up the material and size it on their own device. If they miss class, I will direct them to the Google Classroom and tell them, go in there and complete blank, and they're able to access it. And then when the week is over, I will push those materials down to the January category or whatever month it happens to be. So people can work on older materials if they would choose to do so. Again, they're preparing for the GED, so the more they practice, the better they get at it. But this gives everybody access, whether they're on a phone, a tablet, laptop, computer. They always know to go to the weekly assignment, to open that up as class is starting, to access those materials. And then if they're absent, they get an opportunity to go in there and make up any materials that they might have missed. And that might be my last slide. I got to double check. That's the problem when you make something one time and then you're done. You're like, uh-oh.
Well,
Yeah,
it is
think
your
I'm
last
done.
slide.
I think
Um,
I'm done and I'm within my 15-minute time limit.
Oh,
If
you're
there were
within your 15-minute time limit, and we have a couple minutes for questions. So perfect.
perfect. Love it, love it. Anything that you want to ask me, I have not looked in the chat, so if something is standing out, I'll just glance at it.
Yeah, well, there is a question. How do you give Google Meet breakout rooms the ability to access the documents while they're in the group?
So that it has to be in Google Classroom, which means before we go into the breakout, and my learners are trained in this. I train them at the beginning of a month. When I get new learners, I spend the whole week just opening up Google Classroom. And then I reserve 15 minutes at the end of my class for new learners to stay on with me. And that's part of that technology support. So when they go into go into the breakout room, their Google Classroom is open on a separate tab, or if they're on a phone in a separate window. So they have those materials. It's not in the chat because that chat won't follow them sometimes in Google Meet. So I will say, open this up. As you go into the breakout room, make sure it's open. And then I might also invite someone to present their screen if they're a student who's been with me for a while and they know how to do that very successfully. And then I can visit the rooms and do some tech support if necessary. All right, other questions? I've got like a minute and a half. I'm just looking through the chat here. How do you share your screen during Google Meets? Yeah, that's technology 101 for me. I had to learn it during COVID, and then I had to learn how to teach my learners how to do it. And that's an ongoing problem, especially if they're on a phone. So if learners are on a phone, I'm going to ask a person on a laptop to share, and I'm going to try to navigate the breakout. So at least one person in the breakout is on a laptop and definitely knows how to share the screen, because that could be really challenging on a phone or tablet. It is doable, but oftentimes it doesn't work as well as you would wish it to.
And looks like one more question.
Sure.
And I see people are already chiming in and answering it for you for the level you teach.
Beautiful. It's nice to have colleagues who know what you do, right? And I'll answer more in the chat when I get off, but I'm getting into the end of my time.
Mm-hmm.
So
Well,
thank you everybody for listening, and I'm going to pass it off to my colleague, Stacy. Thank you.
Right. So inviting Stacy to come on and also letting people know if you do have questions specifically for Tammy that pop up, feel free to put those in the chat.
All right. Hello, I'm Stacy Abraham. I work with Southwest ABE in Marshall. The classroom I teach, it's multi-level EL, and it's continuous. So we don't have we go year round. So people are coming and going constantly. The group of learners I have been in for a while, and then I'll lose some, and then some will stay, and then I'll get other ones. So it's kind of, sometimes it's continuous with the same students, depending on the days. Some students only can come one day a week. So it makes it a little more difficult, but mostly I use Zoom. I've used Google Forms for them to answer surveys about how they want it, things they want in class, or with our spelling tests and dictation tests to give me their answers, to give them that other digital literacy skills. I use Remind a lot. I use that to send out the calendars, any other announcements of things that we have going on, other opportunities for students, or even for them just to, if they have questions, or they'll let me know, hey, I can't make the class today. Also use Read Theory as a distance learning outside of classroom way for them to practice their reading skills. Right. Some of the strategies for encouraging engagement: every time a student enters the class, whenever they come some join right away, some don't, but I always greet the student by name, ask them how they're doing, how their day is going. If it's Monday, ask how the weekend was, just kind of check in with all of them. We started having the students type in greetings into the chat as well. So I'll start off and say good morning. And with Zoom, if someone joins afterwards, after the chat's been, and they don't get the rest of the previous chat, so I always re-put it in, which is interesting because then people will re-put their greetings in. They love to add the emojis, so I did show them how to do that. So some of them are we talked about, we had some topic one day and it was about pie. So they found the little emoji for pie or something. So they add some of those fun things in there. Or if it was snowing, they found the snowflake or a cloudy day. So they love to add those emojis. Another thing that I do every day, there's a daily message. In that message, that they need to copy everything down. And then they also have to make corrections to it. There's a discussion question or topic at the end as well. So after we've discussed everything else, through that, we have that discussion and people can chime in and I call on everyone also. And there, I do have an example, so I'll explain it a little more in detail later. I do ensure that each student gets a chance or a turn to talk or read. I just sometimes I don't have a very large class most days. So I just kind of look at my Zoom and I just kind of either go clockwise, counterclockwise and call on everyone if someone hasn't had a chance to talk and make sure everyone does, whether we're answering the discussion question at the beginning of the day, going through answers, reading materials, reading through questions, any of that. I do also have them work in groups on different things, put them in breakout rooms. I try to group them with a variety of levels. I do have some students who do need very low English skills. So they rely a little bit on a couple other students to help interpret for them and stuff. So sometimes I put them in a group. Sometimes I'm like, well, I know I'm going to push you a little bit, but I do make sure I go into all the different rooms with them as well. Check and see how everyone's doing. Okay. Next slide. Activities that I like to do. I'm going to kind of go backwards. Daily message has grammar, discussion, sentence, and sentences, which I'll get into later. Sparkle is how we practice spelling words. They love the Sparkle because I don't know if anybody knows what Sparkle is. So Sparkle is you practice spelling, you basically give the students a word and everyone takes a turn. Like I project the list of the order of everyone is going in. So one person says the first letter and each person says a letter until the word is spelled entirely. And if the person before you finish spelling the word, you say sparkle. Right now in my class, we're still working on that because we just kind of started that the last couple months. They're still getting used to that. And usually we haven't done eliminations yet. Normally we would, when I had in-person classes, it would be if you say sparkle, then the next person is out. So the goal is to be the last person spelling words. When you have maybe 4 or 5 students, it goes really fast if we do that. So it was also a way to, like I modified it so everyone just stays in. No one's, loses their spot in the game. So yeah, so then the daily message. Oh, nope, you're good. Yep, daily message, discussion, sentences. They do a lot of interaction with that. And like I said, there's more detail. I have that example coming up. So yeah, go ahead. Next slide. Class routines. Excuse me. That greeting in the chat. They really like doing that. Again, that practices the digital skills, conversation, a little bit as well. Sometimes they'll say, how are you today? Or I'll put in, how are you doing today? And then they'll do that, or they'll comment on someone else's chat or thing message that they put in the chat. A daily message, they really like that as well. They work together first they start and work on their own, and then they work together as I projected to go put in the corrections. It gives them an opportunity to talk about themselves as well when we get to the discussion topics or discussion questions. And that repetition of the structure and words. So it is pretty much the same every day. And it stays that way for a while, and then I might change a couple things. But then I keep it the same way because that also helps those students who may just be starting classes, they'll catch on, and then that helps them feel some sort of accomplishment. I think they're like, oh, this is too hard, or oh, now I understand it. And so when everyone seems to be catching on, then I change things. So here is an example. So this is an example of the daily message. Always have some sort of greeting like good morning. Then it would be, you have to fill in, usually there's a date. So this is what they get. When they come to class, they get about 10 minutes to copy it down. make their own corrections in their notebook. As you can see, there are words missing. Not really there. This one doesn't have any punctuation. Sometimes they'll put the wrong punctuation in, words that are spelled wrong, homophones, missing letters, words that might sound a little bit similar when we hear them, but they're not. They're a little bit. So one thing I do is like thing and think. Sometimes those get confused. So that would be an example that they would have to copy. After that 10 minutes, then I say, okay, 10 minutes is up. What are the things that we need to do? So as you can see, good morning. Oh, oops, forgot the period under morning on my answer. So they would say capital G. So I have them say capital G because beginning of the sentence, you have to capitalize the letters, and then they'd spell out good, and they'd say period where it needs to be. And then, so they have to, if they don't say capital T for today's, I write lowercase and wait for them to see if anyone else catches on. So everyone kind of chimes in when they can. So as you can see, there's missing words, punctuations, all of that. And the last two at the bottom are mixed up sentences. Those are the ones they really struggle with sometimes, depending on how I've worded them, and the things that I've messed up on them or scrambled or spelled incorrectly. But they actually really enjoy it. Like, oh, that was really hard, but that was good. And then we'll have, so like the holidays themselves, we talk about those. There's a website that I use, nationaltoday.com. It has a list, like there's a holiday for every day of the year, like every day. And I just pick a few of them, and then we discuss them and have kind of go over the holidays, and then we usually have a discussion topic or question about one or more of them as well. Okay. Questions?
Yeah, we have some time for questions. So does anyone have anything specific that you would like to ask Stacy? Okay. There's a question in the chat asking if you're showing this message on a Google slide and are students writing in notebooks?
So what I've been using, so when I was in the classroom, I had Smart Notebook, and that's what I use because I get these out every, like a week ahead of time, the week before. And then I share my screen that way. They do write it in their notebooks. I did have an issue last week where my Smart Notebook froze. So I quick retyped it into a document, and then I pulled up the whiteboard on Zoom and used that instead.
Great. Is there any other questions directly for Stacy? You just got a thank you. I'm wondering if you could talk just a little bit more about Smart Notebook.
Oh, Smart Notebook is with like smart boards that are used like in classrooms. So it's a way, it's an interactive, so this are you familiar with smart boards? Would be like where you project it and your computer is hooked up to it, so then you can actually go up to the board, and they have special markers and pen that you can actually use so students could go up to the board and write, but the notebook itself is just like it's basically a slideshow, and you can add different things to it.
So now that you're virtual, are you using the same slides, Smart Notebook, and then just writing on them real time?
Yes.
Okay. Got it.
Yep. Mm-hmm. Yep.
All right. Well, thank you so much for sharing all of these great ideas. And just a reminder to people, if you have any follow-up questions for Stacy, go ahead and put those in the chat, and she can answer them via chat while we're moving on to the next presenter. Also, and we will have that time at the end for some additional questions. All right, we are moving on to Klas, our third panelist. So going to invite Kris to turn on their camera. and introduce themselves and jump into their ideas.
Yeah, thank you. Tammy mentioned before, we're both at the Hub Center. This year I am teaching Communication B. Our communication class incorporates all 4 modalities that you would do in a normal ELL class, but I think the focus, sort of the engine underneath it, is written communication. ELL B2, and so you can see there's that B represented in both of these class titles. B2 is kind of the higher end of the B level, so it's a intermediate, maybe higher intermediate group. And then I also teach the GED science class, so I am working with some of the same learners that Tammy is. And some of the tools I'm going to talk about today are Google Classroom, which Tammy also mentioned, and then Desmos, which is a big favorite of mine. Just starting off, you know, the way to get the most people engaged is to get everybody in the room together first. And so I know a couple people have already talked about different ways that they do this. I have found that I'm most successful if I send students both a text and an email every day. Text is particularly helpful for the students who are using their phone to join class. Email is great for students who are using like a laptop or an iPad, another device that's maybe a little bit bigger. I used to use Remind, which Stacy referenced, and is great for sending out those kinds of communications to a large class. I have switched in the last couple of years to using talking points. Both Remind and talking points let you make the, you know, whatever you're going to blast out to students ahead of time and then schedule it, which is great time saver, right? Since I'm sending these out on a regular basis. Talking points lets you, when you input students into your class, put their first language in as well, and then it automatically translates those texts as they're getting sent out. Remind can translate texts, but it's a little clunkier. And I actually wrote an article for World Ed about talking points and kind of comparing it with Remind. If people are interested, I will throw that link into the chat later. And then, you know, Zoom links, and since we use Google Meet, I use my Google Calendar to send that email out. So again, it just takes a very short amount of time, and you can schedule them ahead. So then once everybody is in the room, I use a warm-up question to make sure that everybody is there and ready to go. It's kind of my first checkpoint to make sure that everybody is on the same page. And something that I used to do is keep putting that into the chat, putting links into the chat over and over again. And I just found that I was spending a lot of my brain power putting things into the chat over and over again. And then, you know, students who come in after something's gone into the chat can't see it. And so instead, I think there's a picture or a screen clip that you can, if you hit the next button. Yeah, there we go. Instead, what I have started doing is I just project this as students come into class. So it's just a visual and, you know, written reminder for them about where to find the link that they need to get the lesson started. So, you know, it's reminding them, this is what the app looks like that you need to open up. You need to go to this classwork tab, find today's date, find the link. Here's how you sign in down there at the bottom, because I do have them logging in with their Gmails. And I'll talk more about this later. It is really a classroom routine, but it does a couple of things. It allows me to spend my brain power and my energy greeting students. I, you know, say, hey, welcome, say their name, how are you doing, that kind of thing. I think that lets everybody feel seen, even with their cameras off, right? Because they've been greeted. It's really helpful for me when I'm trying to do attendance later and jog my memory about who was there that day. And then you know, the instructions are up there prompting them. So again, I can be interacting with people and answering their questions instead of worrying about getting them started. Yeah, okay, yep, go on to the next one. So the other thing that I do is that link that is in Google Classroom waiting for them is to our Desmos lesson for that day. And Desmos is an interactive lesson planning, lesson building tool, like lots of the other ones that are out there. People use Nearpod and Pear Deck does some things like this. What I like about Desmos is this Desmos dashboard. And you can see on here, I've anonymized their names, so you're not looking at my actual students' names here, but where there's a circle, the little dots shows that that student has been on that page and has done something there. So from this summary page, you can see a couple people came in late, and then some people had to leave early, so there's no dots there on those later screens from them. But I can quickly go down my list and say, hey, Genevieve Knight, it doesn't look like you're in the lesson right now. Will you go back into Google Classroom and click on that link and do this activity with us or whatever. So it gives some accountability for students. It also lets me very quickly see what they're doing. If you changed to the teacher tab, which I don't have a screen share of that, but I can actually see them all working live. So it gives me an idea of how much time we need to spend on something. I can quickly see who might need some prompting or some help with what we're working on. If I need to clarify my instructions to the whole group, things like that. And so it actually allows there to be a lot of quiet space in an online call where people are working and focused, but I can still tell that they're engaged, even though their camera's off and nobody's mic is on, for instance, in a writing class or something like that. Yeah, let's keep going, I think. So I know a lot of people use breakout rooms, and breakout rooms are tricky for lots of reasons. And I have had, some of the same experiences. So what I have landed on, first, they have that Desmos link in Google Classroom. So they have whatever instructions and workspace that they need in the Desmos link. So once they're in the breakout room, they can find that and have that open in another window or another tab, kind of as Tammy talked about earlier. So they don't have to, they're not going to have a link from me in the chat once they enter the breakout room. So that's my workaround for that. But then also, we send students into breakout rooms with the hope that they're all interacting with one another. And I think it's very easy. We've all done this too, right? To be like, oh, well, actually, I need to go to the bathroom right now or wash the dishes. And so they're not actually doing anything when they get in there. So what I have found is more successful is using these roles. And so as part of the instructions, before I put people into breakout rooms, I have this as an image, and it goes on every screen when I'm going to have them go into breakout rooms. And these probably look really familiar if you did any work around cooperative learning in your teacher preparation, right? So we've got the reporter, the person who needs to be listening and paying attention to what the group is doing when they come back to the main group. We've got the writer. So you can see that this one is actually for Jamboard, because it talks about somebody who knows how to use the sticky notes in Jamboard to write what the group is doing together. A manager, and this is the person who knows how to share their screen. I do try to teach all of my learners how to share their screen on their various devices. But if somebody's in there and they're having a hard time sharing their screen, somebody else in the group who knows how to do that can be the manager role instead. And then the timekeeper. Google Meet has how many minutes are left in your breakout room up at the top of the screen. So this is somebody who can pay attention to that while everybody is working. And I think it just helps kind of keep everybody accountable to do their part in the breakout room, and also help you know how to engage in the breakout room, right? And especially if, you know, I don't know how to share my screen. Sometimes students will be like, I can't do the breakout room because I don't know how to do that. And it's like, well, everybody can play a different part, and we can focus on each person's strengths and what they do know how to do while they're in the breakout room. And so that has made my breakout rooms a lot more robust and interactive. Something else that I've had some success with in developing my breakout rooms and just making them more successful overall is Google Meet. When you make your meet on Google Calendar, also similar to what Tammy was talking about earlier, you can preset those breakout rooms. You can make them ahead of time. And so sometimes I will look at my roster and see who speaks what languages and preset same language breakout rooms. Now, once I'm in the call, I can choose, do I want to use those preset breakout rooms or not? And there's also a shuffle option. And so I adjust back and forth depending on the task that I'm having students do. So if I have a more open-ended tasks where the instructions are a little more tricky, or they need to like be more creative, maybe they're writing a dialogue together or something like that, then I might have students who speak the same first language in a group together, use those preset breakout rooms so that they can really support each other in working on that task. Now, if I want them to be, you know, producing spoken English together, then maybe I'm going to shuffle those breakout rooms instead so that, you know, they don't have that getting in the way. They're focused on the English production instead. So some successful class routines that I use is that this screenshot that I have down at the bottom here, where I have the instructions of what I want them to do up when students are coming in, so that they are going directly into Google Classroom to go grab that link and get started. Again, just that focus. I want my focus to be on greeting the students as they come in, but they need to get into the lesson and get started. And so, you know, while I'm greeting other people, students have something to be working on, kind of a bell ringer type of a deal, right? And then that also lets me look in Desmos and say, okay, I got 20 people in the room, 20 people are in Desmos, let's get off and running. Everybody's ready to go.
Kristen,
yeah.
just jumping in to letting you know this is your 2-minute warning.
Perfect. Okay. I think that this is the last thing I want to talk about, this Notice and Wonder Lab. Yep, perfect. So for my GED learners, it is a science class. And so we want to do labs together, but we are in a virtual classroom. Now, PhET, and this link up at the top is one of their many simulations that they have, which are fantastic, and we use them a lot in class, but there's no way for me to see what students are doing on their individual device with these PhET simulations. And so what I have done is, this is in Desmos, that lesson building program that I talked about. I have the link there for them. Students can follow that link. I have my instructions about what I want them to try. And then I have this space down at the bottom for them to respond to some sort of notice and wonder type questions. Try this simulation out. What patterns are you seeing? What happened? What are you wondering about? And then once they start typing in there, I can see in Desmos who has gotten done with the lab and who's ready to discuss. And then I can kind of gauge when we kind of come back as a group that way. And then that sort of sets the tone for the day and gives us kind of a line of inquiry to follow in our discussion.
Thank you so much, Kris. We are going to move on to MaryBeth, our last panelist. However, there are a lot of really good questions in the chat that came up. And so if you wouldn't mind sorting through those and answering some of the questions, there's some really, really excellent ones, particularly about how you utilize the technology that you're sharing. Okay. All right. Moving on to our final panelist. Thank you so much for being here, MaryBeth.
All right. Hi, everyone. If you're familiar with the Be Real app, that's what my picture is. You can see my online class in the corner there. I teach at Brooklyn Center, Adult Education Center, and we use Zoom, so I'm quite biased because there's lots of perks. But I teach 1.5 hours online and 1.5 hours in person each day. Same level, different students. So I am going to share some ideas, but they are not earth-shaking or probably new to you, but I just want you to realize that small things can make an online class more engaging and fun. So Andrea, next slide. So the first thing I want to talk about is this chain game. I use a chain game anytime there's a question that I want everyone to answer. So for example, student A would say someone else's name and then the question, and student B would answer it. And then I would make a check mark next to their name. So if Sarah said, Sarah said, Jacques, what did you eat for dinner last night? And Jacques said, I ate chicken and rice. And then I would put a check mark next to his name. And then Jacques would start the question with someone's name. And he would say, Ibrahima, what did you eat for dinner last night? And then Ibrahima would answer. So the questions that I choose are usually related to the unit that we're working on. So that example of what did you eat for dinner last night? We were working on irregular past tense. And then they each get a chance to conjugate eat to ate. A second one is ripping paper. And I just feel like sometimes life or online world can be so complicated, and I just want it to be easy. I don't want to go searching for tabs, and I don't want to do Google form or whatever. So I just say, all right, grab a paper, any paper that you have near you, and rip it in 2 pieces. And so this is good activity for anything that has, 2 choices or 2 or 3 choices. So my picture on the slide is how long and how often. So I would say an answer, I would say every day, and they would hold up either how long or how often. And then, depending on what they say or what they show to their video, then we can talk about whole questions that go along with that. So like if my answer is every day, the question would be how often, and then we can make a question like how often do you take a shower? And the answer would be every day. How often do you eat food? Every day. So I would do another answer like 75 minutes, and that they would hold up the how long paper. And then we can say, how long is this session? And the answer would be 75 minutes. It's also a great way to get students to turn on their cameras. I like how before someone said camera ready. I don't have too many students who choose not to turn on their cameras, probably because they know that I'm going to make them eventually show me paper in front of their video. So that's how long and how often. The next slide, please. I do this a lot for encouraging engagement. It's just take a picture and text it to me. I have a Google Voice phone number that they all know. But this is one of the hardest things for me teaching online, is not to be able to see their work. You know, like I love walking around the classroom and seeing what everyone's doing. And it is killer for me to sit there and wait and hope that someone is doing something. So, and students really want me to see what they're doing. So, sometimes I offer feedback and sometimes I don't. Sometimes I just want to make sure that they're actually doing something. So you can see my examples here. Like the one on the left was just copying something on the board. The middle one, you know, going from the base verb to irregular past tense, sorting the regular ed endings into the sounds. So, and then there's a math worksheet. So I sometimes send a worksheet home, and then they can do it with us in class, and then take a picture. All right, next slide. All right, so this 5 questions, a little bit about me. I am a big question asker, and it drives my children crazy. They say I ask too many questions, but I'm just curious about everyone, and I want to know many things about people. So the way I do 5 questions is I have 5 questions projected on a Google Doc, and I have them, you can see in picture 1, make like a board, and each square has a student's name, and then the numbers down for the 5 questions. On a different page, they actually write the questions down. So the questions were, for this one was, where are you from? What time do you wake up? How many brothers do you have? What hotel have you stayed at? Or no, when was the last time you stayed at a hotel? And what's the last thing you lost? Some of those questions were related to our unit. In Burlington English, it was the workplace, and we were talking about hotels. So that's why the hotel question, and losing things was involved in that unit as well. So I put them in a breakout room, and with a partner, they ask the questions to their partner. The partner asks the questions to them. And then I have taught them how to choose their own breakout room. And so then they go to another room and they find someone that they haven't asked the questions to. And they ask the questions, and then they move on. They keep jumping rooms. That is not saying that this is perfectly smooth and awesome all the time. So I am opening my breakout rooms, and I am monitoring who's in there. And I love Zoom because you can see the microphone speaking. So if there's 2 people in there and there is no microphone action, then I hop in and ask who they need to talk to next. And then I move them myself. So it's a combination. Some students have it mastered and can find the breakout room they need to go to, and other people need more assistance. And that's when I come in. And then for reading rotations, I also find it difficult to do this online class. Just getting students the opportunity to read out loud. So I figured out how, if we have a reading passage and we read it together, and then I give them a chance to read to each other. And on the bottom, you can see the rotation. So I give them maybe 2 minutes in the breakout room with their partner, and then all of a sudden I pull someone into another room and another into another room. So it's like kind of like whiplash, but they know that they're getting a new partner and they're going to start reading again. And so they read it like 8 times to a different person every time. And so this just helps me and my brain know who has read with who so that they don't read to the same person more than once. And then, oh, I should have edited that part, but we're gonna go to the next slide, I think, because there's a quizzes slide. Yep. So I just have a question in the chat. If you can tell me if you have seen or used quizzes before, just a yes or a no. See what everyone's doing. All right, yeah, it's like half and half. That's great. If you have not seen quizzes, I say give it a whirl. I like it. It's similar to Kahoot if you have used that before, but I find it easier because Kahoot has colors and symbols for their answers, and in quizzes the answers are right in the box, so you don't have to remember what the answer is for the blue square. It's just right there. It's easy to join like as a student, so I just make a quiz and then I tell them to go to joinmyquiz.com and I give them the join code and they enter the code, they click join, and then they type their name and they press start, and then when everyone is in, I start the quiz. You can choose how much time you want for each question, or you can manually go forward when you want. So up on the screen are a couple examples. So some grammar exercise. My birthday is July, and they choose, and I can see who answers what. And then the second example is North Star digital literacy lessons and vocabulary, and I made it a quizzes. So I invite you to look at my quiz. This is an actual join code, and this is for asynchronous learning. So you can do it live or you can assign it as an assignment. So I assigned my basic computer one to you guys. So you could go to joinmyquiz.com and then enter the join code, and you can work through those questions whenever you want. So we're not going to do that right now together, but at home, you know, on Saturday night when you have nothing else to do, you can do North Star quizzes. Yep, next. Successful classroom routines, just using the chat. I think other people have talked about this a bunch, but every day I have them write the date in the chat, and it's so fun to see the progression of correctness. I don't know if that's not even right, but you know, at first they don't have anything spelled right, they don't have any commas, they have it all mixed up, and then pretty soon they have a perfectly written date with commas and spaces.
And MaryBeth, I'm going to jump in. This is your 2-minute warning.
Perfect. And then every day I try to get them in breakout rooms to have conversation, because when you are in an online class, you don't get much time to talk. And I've had several students who are in bigger classes kind of complain about that, like they wish they had more chances. So one way to do that is to put them in breakout rooms and talk to each other. Back up a little bit, Andrea. Okay, yeah. So I have 2 things I do in the breakout rooms is notice and wonder. Multiplicity Lab has awesome pictures that you can use and talk about. I mean, you would never think there'd be that much to say about one window. But we talked about the season, where that could be, how many squares are in there, there's 2 rectangles and each rectangle has how many squares. And so there's so much to talk about. And then 1-minute talks. I put 3 people in a room. I give one person the job of being the timer, and they need to tell people to start and to stop. And I give them a picture. So like this picture of the donuts, I say, before I let them in the breakout room, we talk about what we could say, you know, like donut places, bakeries, what kind of donuts, sprinkles. We go over some vocabulary. Then I put them in breakout rooms and they each talk for 1 minute. And when the person who is talking, the other 2 are silent and not asking questions. And then each person gets a chance to talk for a minute. And when the 3 minutes is over, then they have a chance to ask each other questions. And that's my routines.
Perfect. And we're actually, MaryBeth, I'm going to invite you to just say a couple more sentences for your recommendations.
Yeah, so I just say there's some upfront work to do with navigating Zoom or Google Meet, but it's worth the effort. If you can get your students to go into different breakout rooms or share their screen, there's more opportunities to do different hands-on engaging things.
All right. And Kris, what would you like to add to your recommendations?
Yeah, so I think we all talked about this, that these consistent routines are really important, right? Using the same sorts of links or the same places for students to find those things helps those complicated digital literacy skills to become familiar and fluent. And I really do think it's important for students to have a place to find the materials you're using before, during, and after class, whether that's a website, an LMS, an email from you, a text from you, whatever that is, so that they can easily find the materials you're using together.
All right, thank you. And then we're going to hear from Tammy and Stacy for their recommendations.
So I think I'm adding on to what was already said, but really the key to learning and teaching online is you have to be intentional about supporting learners. So that tech support has to be an integral part of every single lesson. And you find a way to bring it in, and then you repeat until people get proficient at it. And it does take a longer time for some people, but in order to have the class run smoothly, you always consider that when you're building your lesson. And if you can do it every single lesson, that is really what's best practice that I've discovered. So I wanted to share that. And then the second one, as much as we don't want to fail, as you learn new ways to teach online, you're going to also make a lot of flubs. I've done so many I can't even count. But I think there's a learning opportunity there. When we take risks as teachers, and we let our learners see us, quote, fail, that's an essential part of learning. And we all know that. We don't want to flub up during a lesson, but I think it humanizes us, and it makes it possible for our learners to take those risks too and be willing to learn right alongside of us. So don't worry about failing. You will fail. Just think of it as a learning opportunity. Those are my 2 little nuggets.
Thank you. And Stacy.
Almost forgot to unmute. My 2 things, everything you do doesn't necessarily need to be big. I've learned that if you start small, you can build on it. Now, when we go to these conferences or learn something new, you just want to do a whole big thing, but even the small things, like I said, when I did my thing, when you greet them every day, that's encouraging that engagement piece of it. The other thing was do things to help them feel welcome, and they will tend to share more. Smiling, again, I've learned a lot of, even when I was in K-12, just building that relationship with them, they feel more comfortable and they'll tend to share more and try and interact more as well.
All right. We're going to move into questions. We have about 9 minutes left for people to ask questions to our 4 panelists. And you can do it in the chat, or you can go ahead and unmute yourself and ask questions out loud.
Andrea, one thing I realized that I didn't mention when I was going through my stuff. So part of the message, it's not just writing the stuff down. I also read through the message with them, and then I read it first and then they repeat it with me. And then my students each take a turn reading on their own, so they get that practice as well. So that's one thing I forgot to mention when I was talking about that. So.
Well, thanks for jumping in and adding that on.
Mhm.
And then we have a raised hand from Elizabeth.
Hi, thank you. I have a question. I think the panelist was Kris. My question is, it was mentioned if the students are working and they're working hard, let them go. What about those students who are, they kind of just bulldoze through it. They just want to sit and open their book and do their thing. But if I let them go too long, so often I come back, I notice, oh, you've done the entire 5 pages, golly, but they did it incorrectly or they're way off the target.
Yeah, thanks for bringing that back. So another tool that is available in Desmos that I really enjoy is that you can pace the lesson. So I will select just the pages that we're working on together at a time. That's all students can click to. I might give them 1 page or 2 pages at a time, just like you might give them like half of a worksheet in class or just 1 activity at a time. And then I also share that on my screen. Once I see that most people have, completed it, then we check it together. I do provide feedback. Somebody had asked about that as well. There's a place in Desmos for me to write feedback directly to individual students, or maybe it's something we need to address as a whole class. And then I'll open up the next page. And that's also really helpful because then, maybe I've got like 10 screens that we're doing that day. And if you join class later, you're on screen 1 and we're all on screen 10 and you're confused, but I can just move the whole group to screen 10 together. And so that's also helpful for the just sort of navigation piece, as well as keeping everybody kind of on the same page and pacing out the lesson.
All right. Let's see, so question that maybe if the panel has anything, or I think it could be just in the chat for anybody to answer. There's a question for Jamboard alternatives. And it looks like, and Danielle already shared a Jamboard alternatives link in the chat. And so maybe people can answer that in the chat if you have anything. And Kris, another question for you or for anybody. Anyone have resources or know of workshops specifically on creating Desmos content?
Yeah, I was starting to type it out, but I'll just say out loud, Desmos does tons of professional development for teachers. Their webinars are free. They also have stuff you can read through on their website to learn how to use it. But one of the most helpful things that Desmos does is they have social media groups where teachers help each other and provide. The other thing I love about Desmos is everything is free and shareable, and you can take somebody else's lesson that they already made and just adapt it to your needs. And so I am in their Facebook group. I know they have one on Twitter, X, whatever you want to call it, things like that, where teachers help each other problem solve and figure out how to use it. And I recommend both of those.
All right. Any other questions for the panel? Oh, Ellen, I see you have your hand raised.
Hey, I was just thinking about breakout rooms, particularly with new students, low-level students, or like classes that don't meet very often. And one of the things that I've been trying to do is have like the same group at least every week and give even just one person the role of like start the conversation because sometimes at some levels or with technology or language levels, there's not a lot of comfort with like having a full-on role. So I was just wondering if anybody else had other things that they've tried with the very, very basics and beginning of breakout rooms. The other thing I tried was telling students like, once you all share, you can leave the breakout room, because I think for some of them the awkward silence of like, now what do we do, can be challenging. So would just love any other ideas.
Great. Anyone from the panel who would like to jump in? And also I'm going to invite the audience that if you have anything that you would like to respond to, go ahead and open the chat and type in some responses to Ellen's question. And Kris, I see you unmuted.
Yeah, I had put this in the chat as well, but I know it like waterfalls, and so stuff gets lost. I just observed a teacher last week who, for her breakout rooms, did a dictation first. And so the students, are listening and writing down 4 questions that match with the grammar that they were working on. And then they had that in their notebook to take into the breakout room. I was responding to something else, so I don't know if that 100% answers that question, but I thought that was like a brilliant, low-tech way that was just so naturally integrated into the lesson anyways, for students to get ready for a breakout room, right? They don't have to go find a link to have open or anything like that. They're writing it down in their notebook, but it's also like that was part of the lesson. It was also an activity that they were doing for learning before they went in. So
Great, thank you. And I do see some other suggestions in the chat as well, so encourage people to look at the chat. And we have 2 minutes. So Christian, would you want to unmute and ask your question?
Yes, thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. And this is to any one of the panelists, but my question is, how do your strategies of engagement support learner retention at your schools?
I mean, I think having engaging virtual classes is a huge retention strategy, period. I know at the Hub Center, I'm sure other people have this experience too. Sometimes you lose students in the wintertime because it becomes difficult for them to attend regularly. And our virtual classes are immensely popular and highly attended and consistently through all seasons, because that is no longer a barrier.
Excellent point, and highlights how the accessibility the online classes can really enhance accessibility, particularly thinking about in greater Minnesota, where the ability to physically get into the class can really be impeded by winter weather. Not so much this year, though. Okay. Anyone else from the panel? Tammy or Stacy or MaryBeth, anything that you'd like to say in the last minute?
But I think just doing it is what, like back to Ellen's question a little bit. I think the more practice they have in breakout rooms or any activity, they get more comfortable, and then they will be more successful. I also like with breakout rooms, telling them they literally have 5 minutes. And when that 5 minutes is over, you come back, even if you're in the middle of a good conversation or if it's totally silent, like there is going to be an end. And I also tell them, if you're done talking about the topic, you can talk about something else. Like I'd rather have you just talking about something than nothing. So, and I feel like my ideas were more geared towards a smaller class, because my class size ranges from like 9 to 13 students, which I realize is on the smaller end. But you can adapt all the things I talked about by just doing half the class. So if you did the chain game, you could just put half of the names up, and then they can cycle through that list on their own too.
All right, we are at 2:01, so I'm gonna just wrap us up and say a huge thank you to everybody here, to the 4 fantastic panelists who didn't just give their time being here today, but also all of the time with our tech run-throughs, putting the slides together, writing and responding to emails. Thank you so much for sharing your knowledge and for saying yes. Really appreciate you being here. And then also thank you to everybody who came and participated. There was some really robust online or discussions in the chat. Really appreciated how many resources people were sharing, answering responses to one another. And also just want to celebrate to the panelists the fact that we started with 62 people and we ended with 62 people. So way to be extremely engaging. Congratulations. Okay. All right.